Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of COVID Calls. I'm your host, Chris Perugine, and today we're going to be discussing the entertainment and performing arts sector with a special focus on open-air cinemas, which we know last week the government announced that open-air cinemas were going to be allowed as part of this effort to start relaxing the measures in relation to COVID-19. So we've seen restaurants and hairdressers and beauty salons open, but we haven't seen any open-air cinemas. And today we're going to be exploring why. We have a number of interesting guests with us today. We also are going to be discussing theatres and how the performing arts sector is coping with COVID as well. But we'll start with the cinema industry. And for that, we have two very special guests. We've got Simon De Cesare, the CEO of Eden Leisure Group, and we have Slavko Vukanovic, I didn't get that right, I'm sure, from the president of Kinemastic and one of the directors of the International Valletta Film Festival. Can you hear me, Slavko? No, you can't? No. Can you hear me, Simon?
Yep, no problem.
Let's start with you then. So you're in the business at Eden Century Cinemas. You had just finished a big renovation and suddenly COVID hit. How did that affect you?
Well, just like everyone else in many industries that have been forced to shut, it's been a very challenging couple of months. But we've tried to do what we can in the last couple of months. We're upgrading and maintaining all of our facilities, whether it's the cinemas, Synergy Health and Fitness Club, or the Eden Super Bowl, as well as in our hotels as well. As you mentioned, there wasn't a lot to do in the cinemas since we had just put in about €1 million into our lobby refurbishment in December, and we had to close in March. So we did a lot of maintenance in the last couple of months, and now our focus is shifting on to preparing for the eventual reopening. We've been investing in our own PPE, whether it's masks, visors, sticky mats, fumigation machines, and finalizing all of our sanitation protocols, which have obviously had to be stepped up significantly, as well as enabling social distancing. So we're installing plexiglass shields, signage as to where to stand or queue, and we've been taking the time to develop a number of technological solutions to improve the social distancing. For example, one is through changes in our seat allocation software. Depending on what the situation is in Malta when we open, we'll implement changes in our system where there'll always be a number of seats on either side of your booking, and likelihood is we'll also leave a row free behind and a row free in front of your booking as well.
Okay, so we'll talk a bit about these measures soon. So you managed to retain all your staff. You're managing to what's that been like? I mean, surely there's been a big financial pressure, right?
There's been a huge financial pressure, and to be quite honest, without the governmental measures and support on the wage bill, it would have been a non-starter. But the reality is that we knew that it was going to be short-term, whether it's 3, 4, 5 months, depending when it really can start up again. There's an issue of content, which one has to consider as well. But no, we invested in training the staff. We got them to help out with the maintenance where they could. And now they're helping out when it comes to implementing the sanitation measures and what we're using to be able to reopen again safely for our customers and for our staff as well.
Okay. Slavko, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you fine now. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll just turn to you for a second, and then we'll talk a bit more about like the sort of measures that can be taken by cinemas. Slavko, you you're the president of Kinemastic. You're probably one of the few people in Malta who has actually done open air cinema, and you're joining us today from Serbia. So thanks for that. But also tell us a bit about the industry and like how you reacted to this announcement that alongside restaurants and hairdressers, open air cinemas are also going to be allowed.
Well, I was thanks first of all for having me on the show. To tell you the truth, I was a bit surprised when I heard the announcement. I thought that all of a sudden the Prime Minister was talking about me. I was like, what? Okay. Because honestly, I do not know of many open-air cinemas in Malta. I mean, Kinemastic has been doing them for the last 16 years. Valletta Film Festival has been doing them for 5, and then there were some film screenings that happened on and off on the island. So to announce that an open-air cinema was suddenly a good-to-go activity was received first with great enthusiasm, but then once I understood the proposal fully, I had certain reservations about it.
What are the reservations?
Well, you have to, once you organize such an activity, you have to understand first that every activity has its expenditures and its income that you try and balance out. To talk about the open air cinema within these conditions where you're going to have like social distancing between chairs, having no bar, have extra expenditure when it comes to health and safety measures and so on. uh, you try and put things into perspective and see if it's actually feasible to do something like that. And then also ask yourself why um, why would I do it? Like, what's the outcome? Like, what does public gain from something like that? Like in this kind of scenario, I don't know.
Don't you think there is a gain to having some entertainment and having some form of artistic expression in this time?
Well, I definitely, yeah. I mean, I think that there is always a need for artistic expressions. I think that whichever way, you find. Um, you can find different ways how to express your artistic views and so on, but it's just that under these conditions I feel a bit restrained as well at the same time. Go out, but we got to have the face masks. I can go to the cinema, but I can't have popcorn. I have to I cannot have a drink. There's in a place where there was like hundreds and hundreds of people, I can have only 50, and within those 50 I can't get close to. If it's a different kind of cinema, you won't even hear the comments about the film. It's a different kind of perspective on the social gathering that it is proposed, I think, to what I believe or I had enjoyment for.
So is it safe to say that as Kinemastic and as the International Valletta Film Festival, you won't be going ahead with open air cinema in the next few months?
No, definitely not safe to say that. I mean, we Kinemastic still has the plan. We have announced the dates: 31st July, 1st and 2nd of August. This is our plan. Now we might have to move the dates a few days here and there. We may even decide to cancel it. This is still an ongoing conversation. And I think this ongoing conversation has to happen as well with the public bodies, with government and so on, to see what is being offered, what can we give, what will make sense. I think this kind of conversation is important because of our public more than anything. But I don't think that proposed measures should put a full stop to how actually this should be achieved.
But you cancelled the International Valletta Film Festival before COVID, right? How come?
Well, no, I think that we have cancelled it during COVID. It was just the beginning of COVID, but the Valletta Film Festival was cancelled originally. The reason for it was because we did not receive the public funding. We had put in measure the 33% of financing for the festival, which was like 1/3 private, 1/3 ticketing, and 1/3 public funding that we're supposed to get or we're hoping to get. Unfortunately, we did not receive it. So due to the lack of funding, we have decided to actually put it to break. I mean, arrival of COVID and COVID measures and so on was kind of a nail on the coffin to the whole situation.
Okay, Simon, what about you? As Eden Group, as Eden Leisure Group, are you looking to get into the open air cinema space at all? I know this is something that, as far as I know, you've never done. But now your cinemas are closed, and you've got this opportunity. Are you going to seize it?
Look, Chris, we started looking into it back in March, well before anyone was even talking about it. When we were closed up, we looked at a number of different permutations, whether we take our own equipment from one theatre and try and create an outdoor theatre, drive-in type thing. And the figures just don't match up. The capital expenditure to set it up, the running costs of operating it are just far too high for such a small potential number of people. It just doesn't make sense. So no, at this stage, we've looked into it, and even before the Prime Minister came out and said that they were opening or they were going to allow these type of operations, we had already determined that it wasn't something which was feasible for us.
So is your focus right now making the cinemas themselves safe?
Absolutely.
And do you think that can be done in a feasible way?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, let's face it, the reality is that Malta is one of the only countries in Europe that hasn't even announced a date that their cinemas can reopen. Almost all other European countries have actually come out with a date, and most of them have already started opening. So Germany opened on 15th of May, Spain end of May, France beginning of June, Italy 15th of June. So there's also a question of content. So when will content be available, cinema, films? And the first decent and big film that's going to be coming out is going to be towards the end of July. So it's a case of trying to get ourselves ready at this point to open up at a time where you can get in a number of people. So if we opened in June, for argument's sake, with 25% occupancy, because we've restricted the number of tickets that can be sold next to each other or in front or behind each other, you're probably not even going to be able to get 25% because there aren't any particularly good films until July. Okay. So there's going to be a natural small number of people coming in, thereby reducing the risk inherently. Plus the other measures that I started mentioning before, which are the online ticketing. 75% of our tickets are now sold electronically, so not using cash. We're now going to be, we've developed over this last 2 months the ability to sell online food and beverage items. So that again eliminates the face-to-face contact with staff. While you're dealing with cash, you still have to hand over the products, etc. Sorry.
But is it safe to say that the cinema industry is already a bit under strain with things like Netflix and illegal downloads and things like that? As in, given these added measures, I mean, we've seen restaurants and hairdressers say that this is really difficult it's really difficult to make money in this context, when your revenue is down and your costs have increased. Do you fear that you will face the same? And then above that, as you've mentioned, the lack of content.
The lack of content is going to start coming in from July, August onwards. So that will normalize itself by the end of the year. It will be normal. So December, you'll have probably your normal Christmas big blockbusters which are coming out, which we'll look forward to, and people will come to us.
Produce them within these restrictions.
A lot of them have already been produced or are in the final stages of production, and we'll just need a few months to fine tune, etc. A lot were meant to be launched in April. There's the James Bond movie was supposed to come out in April, but I think that's moved to November, December later this year. So there will be a lot of good content out there. But in terms of the cinema experience, what we've always experienced is that the outing, the excursion that people look for is always more exciting and more important than sitting at home watching a film. And this is why we invested €1 million into redoing up the lobby and making the experience better and more enjoyable to people who decide to venture out of their homes.
Mm-hmm. And Slavko, do you share that sentiment? I know that Kinemastic, you usually have a party as part of it as well, and you have a bar, which is where you make a lot of the sales from as well. I guess this social gathering aspect is so important, right? Oh, is Slavko not with us anymore? I think he's frozen. I wanted to get a sense, Simon, of the fact that you've got all these cinemas closed and all, like what do you think? Do you think people are going to get used to sort of not going to the cinema in that sense? After this time.
I don't think so. I think there will be that element of concern and fear, and this is where serious companies like ours need to show that we've got sanitation processes in place. We're doing what we can do to try and restrict people being seated next to each other, and I think ultimately people will really want to get out of the house and go and experience and have these fantastic experiences with their friends and family.
Slavko, before you left, I was asking you how important the social experience is around cinema, and you know, something like Kinemastic. Will you be able to create enough of an environment if you don't have a bar, if you don't have, you know, a party afterwards? Okay, I think his Serbian connection isn't working as well as we now hoped. Let's just move on then to, so Simon, thank you very much for being with us. I'm just going to move
Thank you for having me.
to the second part of the show, because we've got two other guests lined up to talk about the situation in terms of culture and the theatre scene as well. So I want to introduce Tony Attard. Just give me 1 second. Tony Attard and Marisha Bonici. So Tony, the founder and director of Culture Venture, consultancy firm in the culture and the arts, and Marisha Bonici, artistic director of Seed Dawn Studios. Tony, let's start with you for a second. Sorry, you guys are muted. Hold on. What is the cultural scene looking like in Malta now that you know everything has been shut down? We know that open air theatres, open air cinema has been allowed. First of all, the same applies for theatre, right? Open air theatre is allowed.
Yes. The same restrictions or the same regulations are possible.
And so, do you expect a lot of productions to start, you know, opening up?
Well, I think we need to reflect a little bit on what the process has been so far. So I think the first situation was like a bit of a shock to the system, no? So you had productions lined up. I would say they're the key months, no? March, April, May, where a lot of things, productions, even in terms of school productions, they tend to all happen at that period, all of which have been either cancelled or postponed. So the first reaction was, you know, how can we transfer this online? That was the first part of the conversation. And also, how do we safeguard the livelihood of artists who actually earn a living from the arts? And that was the first thing. And I'm thankful that even artists could even benefit from the wage supplement. So that was a kind of, until the dust settled a little bit there. And we have had a very interesting movement of some shows shifting online. We had fundraising events happening. But of course, the core activity has stopped. Schools have stopped operating. Dance companies have stopped working. Companies have, you know, because ultimately it's not just having the public, but also the artists in the same room working together, which is problematic. So even how we now recover from this is also part of the conversation we need.
In fact, at that point, I'd like to ask Marisha. Marisha, you teach dance, and you obviously have a lot of experience in the dance sector. First of all, how are dancers handling this situation? I mean, they live to dance, and now they can't even show up in a studio.
I think I'm on mute.
No, you're not. We can hear you.
I'm not. Super. Okay. Well, I think obviously times like this bring a lot of uncertainty, and it's obvious. So I think the first thing a dancer goes through are the positive days, the negative days, like everyone. But I think at this stage, we've come to the stage of being realistic now. So we had 10 weeks. We had to find a way to keep going. Yes, it's not ideal, but ultimately it's also continuing a process or a program which kids would have started. I think for me, it has been very much looking into the original vision. And I believe, obviously, outdoor cinemas, etc., are great. But what about the live performance? But really, that's the end, because at the moment, we can't even go into a studio. So we can't even do the obvious of being with, if you have a company, there are some lovely Maltese companies. You can't even be with your peers, in a sense, or your colleagues working towards something. So at this stage, I think it is a matter of seeing what is viable, and also I think being realistic in what the targeted goals are, because as Tony rightly said, productions are being moved and shifted. But can Malta have so many performances in 2021? I don't think so. Are they all going to be sustainable?
Yeah.
I don't think.
But from a performer's point of view, I mean, how much has this, ruined people's plans? I mean, I imagine even like in dance, if you stop, rehearsing for a number of months, that's probably quite bad for your technique and things like that. Are you coping? Are you doing things online, for example, at the moment? Is that something that
Yes, I mean the majority are doing things online. It's keeping connected, and I think that's what you have to do right now. Remain connected. If one looks at the international scene, which I think is important to do, the companies that have started in Germany, Switzerland, Monaco today, they don't start with season 2020-2021. They started with the obvious: get in a studio and start, in a sense, building again. And I think before one starts to project and give dates, I think it's important to see what we can do where we are at now, be productive with where we are at now, with the good and bad days, but in a sense, not lose hope or not lose sight of the original vision, which brings us a lot to better collaboration, because it's important to understand that I feel it's very three-dimensional. The nurturing, the creating, and the performing. And the cultural sector, when it comes to the education side, is fundamental, I think, in continuing and restarting, I believe, the performative side to even helping companies remain more sustainable.
But at this stage, is it a question of, are you frustrated at the government for not lifting the measures when it comes to being able to go into a studio, or are you as performers not willing to go into a studio for health risks?
No, I think everyone has a different, to be honest, I think everyone sees it differently. In my case, or I will talk about the cultural education side, we're dealing with students, we're dealing with children. It's very different to have a child come into a ballet lesson or a jazz or a modern lesson and, keep them at an arm's length or tell them sit there and not there. It's a different way to be. I think we have to also be understanding in the position we're in. We have to trust that the health authorities are obviously doing what is right for us. And at this point, like any other sector, we have to try and do what we can, given our resources, I guess.
But so if the health authorities tomorrow say, okay, you guys can go into a dance studio and start rehearsing, do you think people will? Do you think your performers, your students will be there?
I wouldn't say no. I don't think it would be just such an open system of let's go. I think there has to be a lot of caution, like abroad, because if you look at what they're doing, even in schools abroad, they're going in with half the amount of children. Some are online, some are in the studio. They're projecting it, etc. So they're live streaming. These are measures that I think are realistic at this point in time. We're not going to go back to normal in 3 weeks' time. I don't see it. I think we're going to find a new normal with new challenges and opportunities. And we need to make best of the situation with each other's help at the end of the day. So there was a project, Chris, just to mention, in about 4 weeks ago with the Royal Ballet School. And they got 6 top international schools together and 1 choreographer. And they basically centralized this choreography, which was very interesting to see kids from around the world, in a sense, working together with 1 choreographer. And this could be the way forward for maybe the next year. That's it. Schools collaborate with a choreographer, etc.
Were they social distance dancing as well? Or?
Well, yes, it was all online. I mean, I don't know, but yeah. Ultimately, when you talk to kids as well who come to online lessons, for them it's just sort of seeing a friend again. And I think it's important to keep that connection.
Tony, I know that you're doing quite a lot of research in this sphere as well, doing some international work as well. I'd like you to talk to us a bit about that, whether audiences around the world are going to feel comfortable returning to venues, including closed venues.
Yeah, in fact, this is one of the big questions we have. Now, when will people, because this is also a cultural thing, kind of. For example, in our context, if you queue or if you're given a specific time when you go to the theater because you have to sit in your seat 30 minutes before, or will you sit and watch a performance with a mask, for example? In some cultural contexts, that is accepted. I mean, theater in Taiwan kept on going, for example. They check your temperature, you watch the show with a mask. Will that happen in Malta if you had to watch a show or a movie screening? The other big issue we have is that a lot of people tend to decide when to go if others decide to go. So that is also a cultural thing. So it's kind of who's going to take the first. But the biggest, I think, question we have at this point is especially the private producers, will private producers take the risk, the financial risk? I mean, just think about it. If you're looking at a relatively medium scale show, that could cost 100,000 euro. If you're running at a capacity, the possibility of bringing in 35% of the full theater, because that's what allowed, when you usually use a 60% mark to even break even, will you even consider it in the first place? So what we really need to be really careful at this point is not kind of force, so to speak, entertainment on a community, not force culture by saying, oh, look, here's an open-air cinema, here's an open-air theater, which is, frankly speaking, either organized by government that will end up taking over what a public-private partnership could do or what the private sector can do. So I think this is very, very important from a policy-making point of view, that we understand what decisions are taken that could ultimately impact short-term and long-term the cultural sector.
So what do you think the government should and shouldn't do in this context? We're talking about open-air cinemas, we're talking about theatre. Like, what are the decisions that you expect to be taken?
Well, I would say first and foremost, whatever the health authorities decide, whatever is safe and healthy for the public, for the performers. And I think that is the level of trust, 100%, that we should have. I think no producer, no theater is asking for relaxing of any measures at this point, and it would be very responsible to do so. But whatever the outcome is, probably there may be some additional support that will be required. Because ultimately, this is not like I have a restaurant, I open my door tomorrow, people can come in. If I'm a theater company, it's going to take me a month, 2 or 3, if not longer, to come up with something. If I'm employing, we have some companies, dance companies, employing full-time dancers. They're still going to be in the studio, and they actually need the necessary support to keep on going. So the possible support, and let's be very honest here, can we imagine a country where theater companies shut down, art schools shut down, theaters shut down? I mean, it's true, the majority of our infrastructure is publicly owned. But unlike other countries, we don't have much of a private infrastructure for theaters, for example. But still, it's not just a pity. This is not just, but actually, it's actually bad for the country itself. Can you imagine what will the next round of tourists come to? For empty festivals or non-existing festivals? It's a pity that we may have lost the Valletta International Film Festival, and we can't afford to lose that festival or any other festival.
I think also it must be said that a lot of these ventures tend to be, it tends to be difficult to be profitable in the good times, let alone in these times where you're going to have people maybe with less disposable income. You're needing to add so many costs to keep the place safe, and you're reducing your possibility of revenue, right? So there's, like, from a financial perspective, it's quite a scary thing. What we're seeing, I think, in the past few weeks as well, we've been seeing quite a lot of streamed events. People seem to be putting quite a good amount of money into those. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, again, we've had a mixed bag of kind of a quick fix solution in a way, because I miss theater terribly. I miss being with people, and I've watched shows online because I really wanted to connect with people. It doesn't mean that because we have the infrastructure, it's not going to replace that live experience. I mean, Simon mentioned this before. Now, just watching a movie at home is a different experience. I'm not saying it's better or worse than actually going to the cinema and watching it within that kind of infrastructure and technology. So yes, we're kind of filling in a gap at this point in time. And we're seeing, in some situations, People are watching shows which would have never been seen in other ways. The rates of live streaming or streamed events, even from the National Theatre in the UK, have increased. We have musicals being screened. And will this translate into a new audience? Maybe yes, maybe not. What I think has emerged from all this is the readiness in terms of for this digital transformation is not equal. So probably arts organizations who were not so active digitally have learned their lesson.
But it's also not replaceable. I agree with Tony, but we have to remember that the arts in itself, the live performance, is something that one cannot really still appreciate in the same way you're appreciating an online system. And I think even for students, it's important for them to realize that it's not the same. An online lesson, an online performance. I mean, at the moment, they're streaming beautiful work, but again, is it the same as going to a theatre? No. And I think this ultimately, as well as people have adapted to the digital side, it still leaves a void, which ultimately is the main feeling and the emotion you feel when you go to a theatre performance. Chris, there was someone on the chat who mentioned, obviously, how studios are being prepared abroad. Just so that I highlight, obviously, the measures are being taken by the health authorities there. And yes, there are a number of directives they have to follow. So it's not just simply they are opening. And I think that's also important to know that it's not a matter of, schools can open, for example, at the end of May. How are you going to open? And that's very different too, like the same way how a theatre is going to open, you know?
Yeah, and like we said, I believe students had stopped going to classes before they were told they can't go to classes, right? So they're probably going to take a while to start going to classes, even when they're told they can. So
and it's understandable, and it's very understandable, because
I want to ask you though what it's like for a young dancer. I know you teach a lot of young dancers, you know, who would have spent years building up to certain exams, certain opportunities, going abroad perhaps, and these are, you know, people who are, again, on a good day, they're in a really challenging environment, and it's just very difficult for them to make it. Now, I imagine some of them have actually missed out on their lifelong dreams, right? Is that the case?
Well, I mean, in some cases, yes, there were big events, obviously, like we've lost performances. Some young students had been working for years for a moment they were going to finally get the glory of, I guess, and had to obviously not go. It wasn't possible. But I think, Chris, at this point, everyone is in pretty much a similar, let's say, that situation. However, that's why I said in the beginning, it's a matter of being now realistic with what we have, and in a sense, looking at your original vision. I believe everyone started off with a vision. Every school, every artist, every company. And I really think it's time that people hone in, realize and look at what their original vision was, and find ways to, in a sense, rebuild. And maybe not rebuild from scratch, but in a sense, start slowly paving the way for what they think may be possible, without the overwhelmment of it, because it is very overwhelming. If you talk to maybe the schools, the dance schools or the drama schools, we don't know when we can have our next performance. I mean, some of us have phoned up theatres that have been blocked till I think 2022 now, because everyone's postponing. So what's going to happen? We don't know. But I think we have to keep the love that we have for the arts and find ways to make it sustainable. And we can't forget the sectors, the education sector, the performative, the company side. I think all together, it will be possible to ultimately start again, even thinking of a calendar, a cultural calendar, which makes sense maybe, or finding theatre subsidized, you know, for private companies, because there isn't that at the moment.
I want to ask Tony about that, because as we know, Tony is very much into public policy and has worked in the public sector for a number of years as well. And it's interesting. I think, you know, for the first time in my life, subsidies have become, you know, the talk of town. Everyone wants a bit of money from the government. It's no longer just a question of, you know, it seems there's very big industries that are dependent and are becoming increasingly dependent on government actually giving them direct cash injections, right? And when it comes to the cultural sphere, I know there's quite a lot of support given by the government already, right? There's a lot of projects, a lot of funding, there's the Arts Council, etc. But do you think there's going to be need for much more serious commitment financially from the government?
Well, I think rather than financial commitment, I think a commitment, and this is probably a universal commitment, which all people in the arts are asking, is for all governments to acknowledge the arts as an essential service. That the arts are ultimately important, that arts and culture is important for our own well-being. I mean, people have been, the first thing they did, now when they're locked inside, I'm going to watch a movie, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to listen to music. Just imagine your life without all this. So the issue then becomes on how much do we want an indigenous, a Maltese growth in this? Because we can import a lot of things, even that right now has been shut down from us as well. So we need this kind of organic growth, and probably the necessary support that will be given and this part of this recovery is not just the subsidy type. And yes, I still advocate for universal basic income for artists. That should be considered. Because let's keep in mind that ultimately we believe that the health sector is important as is public good. Education is a public good. So is culture as a public good. So if we don't understand this, the same thing as media. I firmly believe that having a media and a free media is part of public good. So if that support, and ultimately why my taxes and people's taxes go to support public good. Whether we will need an additional cash injection, probably we need to understand what's going to happen in the short, in the medium and the long term. If we will have companies, like we just mentioned the Valletta International Film Festival as an example, if these companies and organizations will not be able to sustain their work through earned income, which means ticket sales, then that could probably lead to some companies to decide to quit. And that is something we can't afford as a country, because we don't have hundreds and thousands of companies and artists. We don't have a lot. And ultimately, so my number one recommendation to all the people watching is ultimately, if you and us, all of us, don't buy our tickets, don't go to the theater, don't go to watch movies, don't listen to concerts, etc., there's not going to be a sector.
And many people complain about the quality and the level of Malta's cultural sector, comparing it perhaps to some of the most well-funded ones around the world. But it is a bit of a chicken and egg situation, right? The more people actually attend the shows, the better the shows can get financially, right? There's that.
Of course, I mean, quality is always going to be a huge debate, and you get the good, the bad, and the ugly, but like any other place. And but I think that's not really fair, because I think in these past years, if not decades, I think there was a level of improvement on a number of levels. But yes, I mean, if technically I can't afford to do something, do I choose not to do it? Do I find a compromise or a consensus on how to do it? But yes, you need to invest ultimately to improve your quality. You need to invest in young people to study more, to train more.
Which comes back to before as well. We can't just focus on one sector. We can't just focus on the company side, because the students that are being nurtured today are your artists technically of tomorrow. So if we're going to leave out a part, then how is it going to be sustainable? It's not. So ultimately, it's everyone in the same. So if you're looking at, let's say, the dance schools, the drama schools, etc., the artists that we have now have come from a particular school, or if not particular schools, Yeah. So we can't just say, okay, then we're going to give the lifeline to the companies and we're going to forget the lifeline for schools. It doesn't work that way.
Okay. Thank you both very, very much for being with us. We're coming to the end of the program, so I'll just be giving a bit of a conclusion. But thanks for sharing your views, Marisha and Tony. That was really, really helpful. Thanks also to Simon Decesra, who was with us before, and Slavko Vukanovic, who was also with us before. So as we've heard, the government has announced that open-air theatre and movie theatres can be allowed in Malta, but the industry is not necessarily in a position to seize that opportunity in a very quick way. We know that there's a lot of costs involved with both theatre and open air cinema productions, and when you're looking at audiences being minimized as well, and costs being extended to things like sanitizer, things like that, it starts to become really difficult to make these ventures sustainable. So we'll continue to wait and see whether any open air cinemas do show up, and how those will work, drive-throughs, etc. And also any open air theatre productions. We'll be waiting to see what the season is like in the next few months. Thanks again for being with us on COVID Calls today. We'll be with you again tomorrow to discuss the very heated topic of football and how that's being affected by COVID as well.